The Brat and the Miserable Old Geezer by Nanny Linda. There was a deafening crash in the back garden of number 66 Lovering Lane when a ball from number 64 flew over the fence and crashed into the greenhouse window pane. "You are nothing but a nuisance," the owner, Mr. Ketchum, screamed as he ran down the rickety path, and from the garden of number 64 he could hear footsteps, then running and sniggering, and then a very loud laugh. Mr. Ketchum surveyed the damage, then picked up the ball and threw it in his shed, alongside all the others that he had collected that belonged to that little brat Jed. He was just sitting down for his morning coffee when there was a loud knock on his front door, and there, standing on the doorstep, was Jenny Willoughby and son Jed from number 64. "Oh, Mr. Ketchum," said Jenny Willoughby, "I don't know what to say. Jed gets so over-enthusiastic when he is outside having a football play." Jenny Willoughby made Jed apologise, saying it would never happen again, but Mr. Ketchum knew that within a few days he would have another broken window pane. Mr. Ketchum was now in a grumpy mood and slammed his door a bit too hard, which made the wood creak and a pane of glass fell out, smashing onto his front yard. Jenny Willoughby and son Jed, witnessing the door slamming scene, quickly headed for their own house when they heard Mr. Ketchum scream. "Miserable old geezer," Jed said, laughing as he ran in to play with his new Batman toy, and received a good telling off from his mum, who said he was being an unpleasant little boy. "Well, he calls me a little brat," said Jed, slumping in the sofa in a sulky and childish way. "And he will do," his mum replied, "if you keep breaking his greenhouse glass, and it's costing me money when you go out to play." Jenny Willoughby then decided that Jed could only play football in the park, and he was allowed to go there for a couple of hours after school as long as he was home before dark. In the meantime, Mr. Ketchum had decided to take his greenhouse down and replace it with a polytunnel. He had seen one on sale in town. So no more broken greenhouse windows, and no more insults thrown over the garden fence. Jed played football in the local park each night with his best friend from school, Morgan Spence. Until one Friday evening, while playing football, Jed made a tackle on a very large lad named Greg, and he ended up riding in an ambulance to the A&E to be treated for a broken leg. Jed spent over a week lying in a hospital bed with his mum Jenny visiting each day, and was feeling really miserable and missing his school friends and being able to go out and play. He had to use crutches and a wheelchair, and on fine days could sit outside, and was able to watch the miserable old geezer building his new polytunnel, in which he was taking great pride. Mr. Ketchum saw Jed hobbling around, leg in plaster and crutches under each arm, and although he didn't wish the lad any ill will, he was relieved he could cause no further harm. One day, while Mr. Ketchum was working, he tripped and fell through the plastic sheet, tearing a big hole in the structure, and the fall took him right off his feet. He lay in a daze for a minute or two, checking for any aches or pains after his mishap, then pulled himself to his feet, swearing all the while, as the polytunnel structure did a domino collapse. Jed had witnessed the incident and giggled so much he had tears running down his freckled face. There was plastic and poles all in disarray, and the miserable old geezer had a scowl on his face. He looked across at Jed, who was still giggling but had stopped long enough to ask if he was okay. "I am fine," the miserable old geezer replied, saying that must have made your day. Jed then erupted in a laughing fit and thought he was going to wet his pants, and the miserable old geezer started giggling too and said, "What are you laughing at, you little brat?" They didn't exactly make friends that day, but rather more like cleared the air, and the miserable old geezer went back to his work, re-erecting the poles and repairing the plastic's tear. A few days later, Jed went to the hospital to have his plaster cast removed from his leg, and on the way home his mum bought him a new football that was signed by his favourite footballer, Ronnie Pegg. Jed walked out into his garden, holding his new signed football in his hands, when he heard a voice say, "Howdy, little brat, I thought garden football was banned." Jed looked at the miserable old geezer who was smiling as he leaned on the garden fence, and Jed smiled back and said, "Your polytunnel looks good, getting rid of the greenhouse makes sense." They both then started laughing, and Mr. Ketchum then said, "Well, I better crack on. Have a nice day. And if you want to play football, Jed, please go to the park and play." "I can't play football for a while," Jed said, "so I'm not sure what I'll do." "Well, you can come and help me plant up my polytunnel. Only if you want to, though. It's entirely up to you." So that was the start of a friendship that lasted for many years to come, all thanks to a greenhouse and a little boy who was enjoying some football fun. And the miserable old geezer stopped being miserable, and the little brat grew into a thoughtful young lad, and they both enjoyed going to a football match, and Mr. Ketchum became like the dad that Jed never had.